Well, it's been 20 years since I've been involved with MCLL and MILR before it. So today I'll be talking to you about how MCLL influences my life. And I'll be leading into that by talking about my life trajectory, I guess. I'll be talking a little bit about bilingualism, I guess, because many people, when they see my name, Gordon Campey, they think of me as only an English-speaking person. But in point of fact, I'm actually a Francophone, which surprises many people. I have lived basically in English and French. I was born into a bicultural, bilingual family. My father was English, my mother was French, but my parents were divorced when I was very young. So the main contact I had at home was in French. I became involved with my father only from the age of 10. He'd lived in another city. So therefore my home education was in French, but really my formal education was in English. So it was a mix of both cultures very early in my life. And in fact, when I started school at 7 years old, I didn't know how to speak English, which was very strange, but that was the case. So as I grew up as a child, we lived largely in English-French neighborhoods. I was born in the Plateau Montreal. And so there were linguistic tensions very, very present in our daily lives. It was there most of the time. There were incidents I remember as a child. If you went down the street and you spoke the wrong language, you would be intimidated. And I wasn't a very, very big boy, and so I had to be very careful with that. There are times when, this is the way you learn how to speak both languages very quickly, so that if you walk down a French street and they say to you, est-ce que tu parles français? And of course you would respond in English, and it would be the opposite if you would speak in French, and then the opposite when you spoke in English. It was something that I learned very, very quickly, that was to integrate myself into both groups as quickly as possible. That way you didn't have any problems. There were times when I wished my parents had given me another name. Gordon, was such an English name, so to speak. When I married and had 2 children, one of the things I wanted to do was to make sure that my 2 boys had very bilingual names. So my 2 boys are called Patrick and David Charles. I often thought that George would have been a nice name for me to have. It's kind of bilingual, and it was okay. Just to demonstrate at what point where we were living was so French, Michel Tremblay, the well-known writer, lived on the street where I lived, and many of his characters came from that neighborhood. As a matter of fact, one of his characters is a candy store owner, which had a store which happened to be right below where I lived, on the corner of Fabre and Lamennais. Lamennais at the time was just a lane. It's now a street. And so if you read one of his books, you'll see he refers to this character on the corner of Fabre and Lamennais. What this has done really for me is it's, as an individual, I'm not only bilingual but bicultural. What does that mean? It means that really I'm involved in both aspects of life in Quebec, in Canada. And as an example of how you see both, when I was a child, I remember we would frequent the family, particularly after I had been in contact with my father. And we would go, say, on the English side or the French side. Well, at Christmas, when we went to the English side, it was mincemeat. It was the types of food that really came from England, because my father's wife and his sisters would cook like his mother would, and his mother came from England. At New Year's, though, it would be on my mother's side with her new husband, who was French, and we would have many, many people. New Year's was very celebrated, and it would take more than one sitting to be able to serve everyone. It would be a tradition, and sometimes it would get even to the 4th sitting, because we'd have so many people come in. It was the kitchen and the dining room was extremely active. There was a really different atmosphere in those 2 families, and it was kind of strange, because you lived it one week and then the next week it was entirely a different thing. My stepfather's family, they had 14 children, so when the 14 children came to the dinner with their children and so forth, it made for a big gang. My father, though, they were only 5, and the 5 weren't always there, and so it would be a smaller, more intimate gathering. So it was a very different atmosphere. Another aspect of that demonstrates this difference, if you wish, is the fact that my father served in the war. As a matter of fact, I was born in 46, just after he came back from the war, and not long after they divorced. My mother was not very happy that my father volunteered to go to the war. But when I discussed this with my father, he explained to me that really in his entourage, if you wish, this was the thing to do. His father was a volunteer for the Boer War as a British citizen before he immigrated into Canada. He was also a Canadian soldier in the First World War. So really, it was clear for my father that he would join the army, as he did in 1939. There are many Quebecers that did not want to go to war. They were not there to fight Britain's war, as they would say. My father isn't considered as a hero on the part of my mother. Matter of fact, she was very upset because he went to war and she had 3 children, my elder sisters, that she had to take care of during the war. She was from a French background, and she could not see the justification for volunteering to go to the war. Things have changed, though. My children, who have known their grandfather, and they've seen some pictures of him, they're very proud of the fact that he went to fight in the war. He went to really save the country, so to speak. So you can see the 2 types of feelings, if you wish, between one generation and another. One of the obvious things that comes out of my life is some thoughts that came out of Hugh McLennan's book, Two Solitudes. It was a book I read when I was young, and it was really, when I read it, I said, this is my life. Not so much in terms of the characters, because my life was rather different, but in terms of the contradictory feelings that the main character had to feel. And the contradictory feelings had to do with the fact, and this I started to become conscious of more and more as an adolescent, is I could not adhere to the prejudices of either side of my family. I often felt that I really was on a fence. I couldn't belong to one group or another. I understood it, if you wish, but I really couldn't belong to it. So this was a clear thought of me, and it was something that I have lived with throughout my life. In my adult life, really things have carried on pretty well the same in terms of the French influences. My first and second spouse are both French. Matter of fact, my current spouse doesn't speak English. My 2 boys were educated in French, although I did speak to them in English sometimes. So today they are bilingual. My education continued to be in English. I have a Bachelor of Science at Loyola, which is now part of Concordia University. Interestingly, while I did work a little bit as a chemist at the very beginning, more as summer jobs than anything, when I got to my final year of university, I ran out of money, and because I was paying for my education. And so, what do you do at Christmas time when you want to work? Well, you work, in the stores. And so I worked at Simpson's selling shoes. Selling ties, selling shirts. Here I was, 6 months away from graduation to becoming a chemist, and I was working selling shoes. Now, however, what this did is it demonstrated to me that I really didn't want to work in a laboratory. I had done that for 2 years previously in my summer jobs, and I realized that working in a laboratory meant staying with pretty well the same people, whereas working in sales, you were interacting with people all the time. And guess what? I really liked it. And so I reoriented my career right before I even started. And so I did not accept any of the jobs, and I had several offers to become a chemist, a research chemist, or a process chemist. And I actually accepted a job with a multinational in sales, starting off in sales training in Toronto. When I was transferred back from Toronto to Montreal, I had the opportunity to work downtown, very close to McGill University. As a matter of fact, at one point, our offices were in Mercantile Building, which are diagonally across from the Roddick Gates. So this was very close to the Management Institute. So I took a lot of courses at the Management Institute at McGill to reorient, if you wish, myself, because really as time progressed in my career, I was much more involved in management and needed the required education, if you wish, in order to perform in that particular job. When I was in Toronto, when I worked in Toronto, this is where my English name, if you wish, kind of hid the fact I had very, very clear French roots. I learned very quickly not to raise sensitive issues related to language. For example, I often heard, why is it so important for them in Quebec to want to speak only in French? I wasn't about to start a long dissertation because to try and explain to people in Toronto why the people in Quebec wanted to speak French and why it was such an important part of their heritage was something I really couldn't do. However, what happened with me as I progressed, as I was, as if you wish, dipping into both cultures, over time it became a positive fusion, if you wish, of both cultures, if you wish. When I was young, as a teenager, it was very, very difficult to manage the fact that I was bicultural, because you want to belong to one group, and you're not, I was not in one group, I was in both groups, so to speak. As an older person, I became to value and really celebrate the fact that I was both English and French. Today, I spent time in both English and French, and I profit by all those things. Is it books, films, TV, theater, current events, all of those things, for me, they take place in English and French. I could be discussing an article with a friend, and he would say to me, well, where did you read it? And I really wouldn't remember whether it was an English-speaking media or a French-speaking media. For me, it's the same thing. It's all part of the information that I gather.